I'm a big admirer of Lee Marvin. I think most people are. He's a most talented actor. He's currently starring along with Oliver Reed in Great Scout and Cat House Thursday. That's the name of the picture, folks. Would you welcome Lee Marvin?
In 1966, Lee Marvin showed up drunk to the movie set and destroyed a prop gun. What happened next would end up costing a studio millions, destroy a Hollywood friendship forever, and make his co-star swear he'd rather wrestle a grizzly bear than work with Marvin again. From drunken delays to revenge punches, this is the untold story of why Lee Marvin's co-star refused to work with him again. Lee Marvin was born on February 19, 1924, in New York City. His full name was Lamont Waltman Marvin Jr., and he didn't have an easy childhood. He had trouble in school because of ADH and dyslexia, which no one understood back then. This made school hard and frustrating for him, and he often got into trouble. One time, he was expelled for throwing a classmate off a second-floor balcony. He went to several schools, including a boarding school called Manomet and a military academy, but he never stayed anywhere for long. Even though school wasn't for him, Marvin loved being outdoors. As a teenager, he spent most weekends hunting in the Everglades. He hunted animals like deer, pumas, and wild turkeys. This time in the wild taught him survival skills and gave him a love of adventure that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Strangely, as a young boy, he also learned to play the violin, something you wouldn't expect from someone who would later become famous for playing tough guys. In 1942, when Marvin was just 18, he joined the U.S. Marine Corps. His father didn't want him to enlist, but Marvin didn't listen. He finished school quickly to meet the requirements and signed up. At first, he worked as a quartermaster, but soon he became a scout sniper in the 4th Marine Division. He fought in 21 battles on islands in the Pacific Ocean, including some of the bloodiest ones like Kwajalein, Eniwetok, and Saipan. The biggest moment of Marvin's time in the Marines came during the Battle of Saipan in 1944. His unit was climbing a mountain when they were attacked. Marvin was shot several times, including one injury that severed a nerve in his back. Most of the men in his unit were killed. Marvin survived, but he spent more than a year in hospitals recovering. His bravery earned him a Purple Heart, but the injuries ended his military career. He was discharged as a private first class, even though he had been promoted to corporal earlier. His rebellious side had gotten him demoted. Along with the Purple Heart, he received other honors like the Combat Action Ribbon and the Presidential Unit Citation. After being discharged from the Marine Corps, the 22-year-old found himself without direction. To make ends meet, he took a job as a plumber's assistant, earning just $27 a week. One day in July, while fixing a toilet at the Maverick Theater, his life changed forever. The theater's director, Robert Elwin, was in trouble. An actor had fallen sick just hours before a performance of Roadside. Desperate, he looked at Marvin, a tall, white-haired young man, and asked, "Have you ever acted?" Marvin's response was quick and clever. "No, but I've lied all my life." That was enough for Elwin, who gave him the role right then and there. Marvin had no experience, but he jumped into the part of a loudmouth Texan named Buzzy. He only had 3 hours to prepare, but he didn't let that stop him. "I didn't know stage left from stage right," he later said, "but I knew how to be loud." When he stepped on stage that night, something clicked. The audience loved him, and the local newspaper called him a natural talent with a magnetic presence. Marvin was hooked. The very next day, he quit his plumbing job and asked for more roles at the theater. Over the next few months, he performed in several plays, falling in love with acting and starting to develop the tough, no-nonsense persona that would later make him famous. By early 1947, Marvin was ready to take things seriously. He moved to New York City and used the GI Bill to enroll at the American Theater Wing, a school known for training stars like Gregory Peck. Marvin threw himself into the program, attending classes 6 days a week. Acting didn't come easy at first. He struggled with accents and Shakespeare, but his raw talent stood out. His teachers saw his potential, saying his face could tell a story even without words. Marvin also made friends with classmates like Jack Warden and Rod Steiger, who would become important allies in his career. After 18 months of intense training, Marvin began looking for work. At first, the roles were small and uncredited, but they gave him valuable experience. In his first film, Leather Gloves, 1948, he played a boxing spectator with no lines. He was so nervous he thought he might throw up. Over the next 2 years, he appeared in tiny roles in films like The Doolins of Oklahoma and 12 O'Clock High. Though these roles were brief, Marvin used them to learn from experienced actors and understand how films were made. He also started working in television, landing a 3-line role as a bartender in Actors Studio. Every small part helped him grow more confident and make connections. In 1951, Marvin finally got his first credited role in the comedy You're in the Navy Now. He played Quartermaster Krause, a minor character with a few speaking lines, but it was a big step forward. The film starred Gary Cooper, and Marvin shared scenes with him, delivering lines like, "Sir, the starboard engine is overheating." Critics noticed Marvin's performance, calling it convincing and natural. Seeing his name in the credits for the first time felt surreal to Marvin. It was proof that his hard work was starting to pay off. Interestingly, You're in the Navy Now also marked the film debuts of Charles Bronson and Jack Warden, who would go on to work with Marvin in future projects. Marvin later joked that the film should have been called You're in the Movies Now. At 29, Lee Marvin's life changed forever when he played Vince Stone in the 1953 noir classic The Big Heat. In the movie, he played Vince Stone, a cruel gangster who did shocking things. To prepare for the role, Lee spent weeks studying real gangsters in Chicago. He watched how they talked, moved, and acted. This hard work paid off. Audiences believed every second of his performance. After the movie, Lee's phone didn't stop ringing. Directors loved how he could bring villains to life, and he got 17 offers to play similar bad guys. The Big Heat was also a big hit, earning $2.3 million at the box office. Lee's paycheck jumped from $5,000 to $20,000 for his next film, showing how fast he was becoming a star. Right after that, Lee starred in The Wild One, 1953, with Marlon Brando. This movie about motorcycle gangs caused a stir, and Lee stole the show as Chino, the leader of a rival gang. In one famous scene, Lee smashed a beer bottle on his own head. That wasn't even in the script. He made it up on the spot. It shocked everyone on set, but became one of the most memorable parts of the movie. The film caused such a commotion that it was banned in the UK until 1967. But in the US, it made $4.5 million. Lee's rough, unpredictable energy made him stand out, even next to a star like Brando. After these films, Lee's career took off. From 1954 to 1956, he appeared in 12 movies, including Bad Day at Black Rock and 7 Men from Now. He became Hollywood's favorite tough guy, playing characters who weren't just villains. They were complicated and intense. By 1956, he was earning $50,000 per film. Lee's reputation kept growing, and people started seeing him as more than just a bad guy. He was becoming a real star. In 1957, Lee made a bold move to TV. He starred in M Squad, a crime drama about a Chicago detective, Frank Ballinger. This show was ahead of its time. It was filmed in real locations in Chicago, which made it feel raw and authentic. The stories were also daring, covering topics like police corruption that most shows avoided. M Squad was a huge success. It ran for 3 seasons and pulled in millions of viewers every week. Lee's salary started at $5,000 per episode, but went up to $7,500 by the final season. The show's theme song, written by Count Basie, even became a hit on the music charts. M Squad was so popular that it inspired spoofs like Police Squad and the Naked Gun movies. Lee Marvin's role in Cat Ballou, 1965, changed his life forever. It was a Western comedy where he played 2 completely different characters. Marvin was Kid Shalene, a drunk gunslinger who was hopeless when sober, but turned into a perfect shot after a few drinks. He also played Tim Strawn, a scary assassin with a silver nose. Balancing humor and danger, Marvin showed how talented he really was. To make Kid Shalene feel real, Marvin spent time in bars watching how drunk people acted. For Strawn, he used what he had learned as a Marine in World War II to create the character's cold, threatening presence. These details made both roles stand out, even though the movie was a comedy. When Marvin won the Oscar in 1966, it shocked everyone, including him. He beat huge names like Richard Burton and Laurence Olivier. During his speech, he joked about how much he owed to the horse his character rode. That joke made everyone love him even more. Before this movie, Marvin was mostly a side character. He usually played villains or tough guys in movies like The Wild One and The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. But Cat Ballou proved he could lead a movie on his own. After his Oscar win, his pay went through the roof, from $60,000 to over $1 million for his next big movie. Suddenly, studios were lining up to cast him in major roles. In 1966, he starred in The Professionals, a Western about a dangerous mission to rescue a kidnapped woman in Mexico. Marvin played Rico Farden, a tough and resourceful weapons expert, and shared the screen with big names like Burt Lancaster and Claudia Cardinale. Filming in the hot Nevada desert was tough, with temperatures reaching over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But Marvin's dedication stood out. He even climbed a steep cliff for a stunt himself. His sharp, witty banter with Lancaster made the movie even more memorable. Audiences loved it, and it became one of the best westerns of the time. Marvin's performance earned him a Golden Globe nomination, and the movie made over $19.5 million, which was a huge success back then. A year later, in 1967, Marvin starred in the war movie The Dirty Dozen, which became one of the biggest films of the decade. He played Major John Reisman, a tough officer in charge of training a group of criminals for a dangerous mission during World War II. Marvin's experience as a Marine in real life made his performance feel real and commanding. The movie had an amazing cast, including Charles Bronson and Donald Sutherland, but Marvin stood out as the leader. He even did risky stunts, like jumping off a moving train. The film was a massive hit, earning $45 million and turning Marvin into one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors. His character's bold personality and memorable lines became iconic, and the movie set the standard for many war films that followed. Later that same year, Marvin showed a different side in the thriller Point Blank. He played Walker, a man out for revenge after being betrayed and left for dead. This movie was different from anything else at the time, with its unusual way of telling the story and deeper ideas about revenge and society. Marvin hardly spoke in the movie, but his intense presence made his character unforgettable. The movie was filmed in real locations like Los Angeles and even Alcatraz Island. Marvin insisted on doing his own stunts, which made his performance even more impressive. While it wasn't a big hit when it came out, Point Blank later became a cult classic and is now considered one of the most influential crime movies of the 1960s. In 1969, Marvin surprised everyone by starring in a musical called Paint Your Wagon. He played Ben Rumson, a grumpy gold prospector during the California Gold Rush. Nobody expected Marvin, known for his tough roles, to sing in a movie, but he took on the challenge. He worked with a vocal coach to prepare, and his song Wand'rin' Star became a surprise hit, reaching #1 on the UK charts for 3 weeks. The movie was expensive to make, with an entire mining town built for the production, but it was still a box office success. Critics didn't all agree on Marvin's singing, but his performance added a unique touch to his career and showed he wasn't afraid to try something new. After Paint Your Wagon in 1969, Lee Marvin's career took a hit. He appeared in several movies that didn't connect with audiences. One of them was Monty Walsh in 1970, a Western that made less money than it cost to produce. Then came Prime Cut in 1972, a crime thriller with Gene Hackman. It was too violent for most people and didn't do well. In 1973, Marvin starred in Emperor of the North. It reunited him with his Dirty Dozen director, but even that couldn't make it a success. These failures showed how far Marvin's star had fallen. In 1980, Marvin made a big comeback with The Big Red One. This World War II movie was directed by Samuel Fuller and based on Fuller's own experiences as a soldier. Marvin played a tough sergeant, a role that suited him perfectly. At 56 years old, he brought his own experience as a Marine to the character. On set, he spent time teaching the younger actors, like Mark Hamill and Robert Carradine, about the bonds between soldiers. Critics loved Marvin's performance, calling it one of the best of his career. The film made $24 million, far more than its modest budget, and earned Marvin his first Golden Globe nomination in 15 years. It was a triumphant return for an actor many thought was finished. Marvin's last movie was The Delta Force in 1986. This action film, inspired by real-life events, had him playing a military commander alongside Chuck Norris. By this time, Marvin was 62 and in poor health, but he still took the role seriously. He even did some of his own stunts. The movie made decent money at the box office, but wasn't loved by critics. For Marvin, it was a final chance to play the tough guy roles he was known for. Meanwhile, Lee Marvin's life was shaped by his struggle with alcohol, a problem that stayed with him throughout his career. He was known for his drinking, and it became part of both his public image and his work as an actor. In 1965, while filming Ship of Fools, Marvin's drinking became hard to ignore. His co-star, Vivien Leigh, who also struggled with alcohol, complained about the smell of his breath during their scenes. Despite this, Marvin's drinking didn't always hurt his career. That same year, he starred in Cat Ballou and won an Oscar. Many people on the set believed that his drinking somehow made his performance even better, which only encouraged him to keep drinking. But his addiction came at a cost. On the set of The Big Red One in 1980, Marvin refused to speak to his co-stars for long stretches, and when he did, it was to insult them for no reason. By 1983, while filming Gorky Park, Marvin's health had gotten so bad that he had to be hospitalized as soon as he arrived on set. The director, Michael Apted, had no choice but to hold rehearsals at Marvin's hospital bed. It was clear by then that his drinking wasn't just affecting his reputation, it was ruining his health. Still, Marvin had a way of charming some of the people around him. During Ship of Fools, he became friends with Vivien Leigh, despite his wild behavior. In one strange incident, he tore up an antique deck of playing cards at Leigh's home, but she wasn't upset. Instead, she seemed to like him even more, which shows just how complicated Marvin's relationships could be. But not everyone was as forgiving. After his TV series M Squad ended in 1960, Marvin didn't get any acting jobs for a whole year. This left him depressed and likely had a lot to do with his growing reputation as unreliable because of his drinking. One of the lowest points of Marvin's career came during The Professionals. When The Professionals started filming in 1966, things got messy between Lee Marvin and Burt Lancaster. The trouble really began on a blistering hot day in the Mojave Desert, with temperatures reaching 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Marvin, a war veteran who cared deeply about historical accuracy, wanted the film to use period-correct guns. Lancaster didn't agree. He thought the look of the guns was more important than their authenticity. What started as a disagreement turned into a full-blown argument. Marvin got so mad that he threw a prop gun to the ground, almost hitting someone. Lancaster was furious and confronted him. The two ended up shoving each other until the crew had to break it up. Filming stopped for hours, costing the studio a fortune. Later, the director, Richard Brooks, pulled both actors aside for a serious talk. The next day, Marvin made a dramatic apology, dropping to his knees in front of Lancaster. It turned out to be a joke, which only made things worse. The bad blood between Marvin and Lancaster didn't go away. For the rest of the shoot, the tension was impossible to ignore. Marvin would purposely mess up his lines in scenes with Lancaster, forcing retakes and wasting time. On one occasion, Lancaster, known for doing his own stunts, was getting ready to climb across a moving train for a dangerous scene. Marvin, despite being hungover from the night before, decided he wanted to do a stunt too. This led to another argument, with Lancaster accusing Marvin of being reckless. Filming was delayed yet again, pushing the budget higher and higher. Things hit their worst point on October 5th. Marvin showed up late to a key scene, smelling like alcohol and struggling to remember his lines. Lancaster, already dressed and waiting in the heat, lost it. He yelled at Marvin in front of everyone, calling him a disgrace and threatening to quit the movie. The yelling was so intense that a young crew member started crying. Lancaster stormed off to his trailer and refused to come out for hours, throwing the entire day's schedule into chaos. The studio even thought about replacing Marvin, but decided it would cause more problems than it would solve. The director, Richard Brooks, was stuck in the middle of it all. He was worried things might get physical. His fears weren't unfounded. During one fight scene, Lancaster's punch, meant to be fake, actually hit Marvin, leaving a bruise. Lancaster said it was an accident, but rumors swirled that it might have been payback for Marvin's behavior. Things got so tense that Brooks added extra safety measures for the climactic mountain scene, including separate rehearsals and more stunt doubles, just to keep the two actors apart. After filming ended, Marvin and Lancaster never worked together again. Their feud became famous in Hollywood. Years later, when asked if he'd ever work with Marvin again, Lancaster said, "I'd rather wrestle a grizzly bear." Marvin was more diplomatic in public, but told friends that acting with Lancaster was like working with a statue that had a bad attitude. Their conflict not only ended their professional relationship, but also likely cost them other opportunities. The drama on the set of The Professionals became a cautionary tale about how personal grudges can overshadow even the biggest stars. Lee Marvin's personal life was full of ups and downs, much like the characters he played in movies. He married twice. His first marriage was to Betty Ebeling in 1951, and they had 4 kids: Christopher, Courtney, Cynthia, and Claudia. Betty put up with a lot during their 16 years together. Marvin drank heavily, cheated, and often got into trouble with the law. Betty later wrote in her memoir that Marvin would get pulled over for drunk driving, but usually charmed his way out of it with autographs for the police. Their marriage ended in 1967, shortly after Marvin won an Oscar for Cat Ballou. Despite his fame and fortune, Marvin shocked everyone when he left just $10,000 to his kids when he died in 1987, even though he was worth millions. His second marriage to Pamela Feely, his childhood sweetheart, was calmer. They reconnected after Marvin's messy breakup with Michelle Triola, and Pamela stayed by his side for 17 years until his death. The relationship with Michelle Triola, though, became the most talked-about chapter of Marvin's life. They lived together for 5 years, and even though they weren't married, Michelle changed her last name to Marvin. After their breakup, she filed a famous lawsuit asking for $1.8 million, claiming she deserved half of what Marvin earned while they were together. This legal battle, called Marvin versus Marvin, dragged on for years and became a huge story. Michelle said Marvin had promised to support her for life, but he denied it. The court ruled she should get $104,000, but even that was taken away when the decision was overturned later. Despite all this, Michelle always claimed she loved Marvin, even until she passed away in 2009. What surprised many people about Marvin was how progressive he was for his time. He openly supported gay rights, saying he had no issue playing a gay character and was secure in his own identity. This was in 1969, long before most people in Hollywood were willing to talk about such things. Marvin's progressive thinking also showed in politics. He was a Democrat and backed candidates like John F. Kennedy, Eugene McCarthy, and George McGovern, who were known for their anti-war views. Marvin himself hated the way war was often glorified in movies. Even though he acted in many war films, he preferred ones like Hell in the Pacific and The Big Red One, which showed the harsh realities of combat. He even turned down the lead role in Patton because he didn't want to glamorize war. His strong opinions sometimes clashed with Hollywood's more conservative leaders, but Marvin didn't care. He stayed true to what he believed in, both on and off the screen. Lee Marvin left a mark on Hollywood that's hard to ignore. He wasn't like other actors. He brought a rough, tough, and real feeling to his roles. This style became the guide for action stars who came after him. Charles Bronson and Clint Eastwood are great examples of this. Both men learned from Marvin's way of acting and used it to build their own careers. When Marvin and Bronson worked together in The Dirty Dozen, 1967, Bronson was already 45 years old, but still trying to find his big break. Marvin showed him how to act like someone who had been through a lot in life. Later, Bronson used this in his Death Wish movies, where he stayed calm and strong, just like Marvin. Clint Eastwood also admired Marvin. Eastwood once said, Marvin taught him that you don't need to say much to show how tough you are. A single look could do the job. Eastwood used this lesson in his Dirty Harry films, making his characters feel strong without talking too much. Even after Marvin passed away in 1987, people kept celebrating his work. In 1998, the U.S. Postal Service honored him with a stamp that showed him in his role from The Dirty Dozen. It was so popular that 40 million stamps were sold in just 1 year. Then, in 2005, the American Film Institute put him on its list of the 50 greatest American screen legends. Marvin was ranked 14th, alongside names like Humphrey Bogart and John Wayne. Marvin's hometown of Woodstock, New York, also wanted to honor him. In 2012, they put up a huge bronze statue of him in his Marine Corps uniform. It stood 7 feet tall and weighed over 1,200 pounds, reminding everyone of his time serving in World War II and his lasting legacy. One of the strangest but most interesting tributes came from a secret group called the Sons of Lee Marvin. It was started by filmmaker Jim Jarmusch in 1986. The group only allows men who could look like Marvin's son to join. Members like Tom Waits and John Lurie meet to watch Marvin's movies and talk about his impact on film.